Hi, I'm Judy Fischel. In this video, I want to share some tools for study, visual tools. Many of us learn best and enjoy learning most when we can use visuals. It's important for you to see two images showing the big picture. This video is a part of a series that can help you understand, study in a new way. Notice that I'm using visuals to help you learn. Here you see learning input on the left side of the little head and learning output on the right. The problem is that information goes in, information goes out, but nothing stays behind. The little head is empty. Would you call that meaningful study? I sure wouldn't. His brain isn't empty now. The information now comes in and goes straight to the brain for mental processing before being used as output. Mental processing is essential for study. You probably can't read it here, but the writing in his brain includes the same 4 parts of study that are listed on the left. First is verbal organization, things like outlines, summaries, and explanations. And then comes visual organization, what we're covering in this video. Then critical thinking and pathways to memory. You might want to see the videos for the other 3 parts of study. Notice that both verbal organization and visual organization include the word organization. What does organization have to do with study? Well, when we organize information, we see how the pieces fit together. We look for new ideas that fit in with what we already know or filled in where we had questions. Did you notice how my visual might help you understand what I was talking about? We're all familiar with ways of visually organizing numbers, and we know how helpful that is. We're also familiar with organizing spatial information in various ways. We will look at different ways of visually organizing information as you study. How many of these are you familiar with? Which ones do you really use? Here we have 2 examples of concept maps. You might think of them as outlines that go in all directions instead of just down. Let's make a concept map. To do that, I chose the 3 branches of our government: legislative, executive, and judicial. You would place the title of the concept map in the center and put some kind of shape around it. You can use rectangles or circles or triangles, whatever you like. Use color if you like. Decide the number of main ideas. Here we have 3 of them. Each one would be attached to the title, and if you have subpoints, they would be attached the same way. Here is my concept map. I've also identified who is involved in each branch of government, and I added subpoints for the Senate and the House of Representatives. Your concept map for the same information might look very different, but the content should be similar. Now I ask you, if you were studying this sort of information for a test or to understand it yourself, would you find it most helpful to study a page in a book, an outline, or something like this? Here's a more complex concept map. It's of verbal organization. And an even more complex concept map describing concept maps. This is a more typical concept map, but you notice that the styles are quite different. A concept map for a chapter can be far more complex than any of these and will require at least a full page. Another very helpful visual is the timeline. You can do a timeline for a period in history like a war or the Renaissance. They can be for long periods or short periods. Here I've done the life of one person, Nelson Mandela. Making a timeline might seem fairly obvious. You start by drawing a straight line. If you need to, connect 2 sheets of paper so you have a longer line. And then divide it into equal sections. It could be divided into days, weeks, months, years, decades, centuries, whatever is appropriate. If you are making a personal timeline, I would use years, because most of you have, 20 years or less to put on the timeline. But Mandela was older, and I really didn't want 95 sections on my timeline. So I divided it into decades. Then you want to choose the most important events in that time period. Some might be a single day, as when Mandela was elected president. Others will be much longer, like all of the years that he was president. And then finally decide for yourself how to divide up the whole timeline period into major parts and label them. Here's a timeline you may have seen before. The geological timeline covers a very long time period. Underneath it, I put a timeline for planning and writing a term paper. It only covered 4 weeks. Another very helpful visual is the multiple timeline. You may not be able to read what's up here, but you should be able to get the idea. This is a multiple timeline, and it's set for the civil rights movement. It shows on top what is happening with Congress and the Supreme Court during the years 1950 to 1970. In the middle, it shows the civil rights movement, and in the bottom, Martin Luther King Jr.'s life during those same years. To see this more clearly, it's on my website, www.chooselearning.com. Another way of organizing information visually is with Simplified Maps. I took the South American map and simplified the shape using just a square over a triangle. In the second image, I've added the countries, not in their actual shapes, but in the right positions, simplified. I could practice copying this image several times and be ready to locate each of the countries. I've done a similar simplified map for Africa, and that again is on my website. A very helpful visual is the compare and contrast chart. Students are often asked on a test to either compare or to compare and contrast 2 things. Actually, compare or compare and contrast mean the same thing. A common mistake that students sometimes make is listing everything they know about dogs and then everything they know about cats. Well, that's not a comparison. If you look at this chart, you'll see that the ways they are similar is in the center where the 2 circles overlap. And then the information about the dog and about the cat are on the 2 sides. But notice that they are similar. For example, in the middle, you have the dog barks at strangers and the cat ignores strangers. The dog is related to a wolf, the cat is related to a tiger. So I'm using categories here, but they're not shown. This kind of a chart is far more helpful. You have a line there where you can put the categories, and then you can list the ways, and you have plenty of space to show how they're the same, and then you would fill in, for example, with that last one, with dog and cat, and explain how they're different. Here's a chart comparing and contrasting a rhinoceros and a zebra, and you will see where the categories are filled in, and then you have ways they're the same and ways that they are different. It's very difficult to do a comparison of 3 things, and even more difficult to compare more than 3 things. But this is what you use. This is an example of a very familiar matrix. It came in handy when I took an invertebrate zoology class where we studied over 100 organisms. And so here where they have 5 across the top, I had over 100 of them across the top, and very similar categories down the left side. The key to studying this kind of information is to put the information in, enter the information vertically, like doing all the information on birds at the same time, but then studying them horizontally. For example, you might study the heart, and you look and see, well, you have a 2-chambered heart, 2 kinds of animals with 3-chambered hearts, and 2 kinds of animals here with 4-chambered hearts, and you get to see the comparisons. There are plenty of other ways to visualize information, but these are the ones that I think students will find the most useful.